protect our waters from, say, foreign fishermen who may be inclined to come into these waters to fish without permission. Well, these are the questions. I wouldn't say, what I'm trying to say, these are things that we have to see. But the fact that you have the right doesn't necessarily mean that others will respect that right. And if they don't respect it, they should be able to take necessary measures to enforce it. But of course, some of us may be hard there because, of course, we don't have the rain, we don't have the river, we don't have anything. Just about anything can go on in our waters. So these are some of the that well, we also have to bear in mind that when we're speaking exclusively about music, of course, foremost in Amanda's mind. Reading a mind. Foremost in Amanda's mind is the fact that you're exploring for resources, you are exploiting resources. Okay, good. But remember that the coastal state will have certain duties to it that it has to perform. So it has to manage and conserve the resources. Because Article 56 says, coastal state exercises within its exclusive sovereign rights for the purpose of exploring and exploiting, conserving and managing. Sometimes we focus only on the exploring and exploiting, and sometimes not. But again, it is in our own interest, of course, to develop some management policies, and we put it in the context of sustainable development with respect to resources. So if we don't manage them, probably before long, we may be without resources. You might find our seas being almost like barren. Already we do not have that much, but of course we get even worse if we do not effectively manage the resources within us. Finally, one other thing that I would like to know, again in the convention, it speaks of Part 9. One of the things, when you look at the Caribbean Sea, so the basin here, it is semi-enclosed. Now, there is a part of the convention, Part 9, that deals with enclosed or semi-enclosed seas. Caribbean falls within the category of semi-enclosed. It's not completely closed, because we have these islands, so waters can come from the Atlantic into the Caribbean, yes? Up in the north, we have some space up here too. It is only when you come down here, of course, it's completely closed. It's completely closed. But the east and to the north, it's semi-enclosed. And what the convention says regarding these states, it recognizes that there must be cooperation of states bordering enclosed or semi-enclosed seas, necessarily. For the simple reason, you're within here. And a while ago we spoke of conservation and management. No one state on its own can develop effective conservation and management policy. Because, again, we have to recognize, even though we claim, Amanda, a 200-mile zone, remember, the fish would not be respected this 200-mile zone. And depending on the species that you're looking at, they can swim very long distances. So if you're looking at the pelagics, fish like kingfish, tuna, cutters, they swim long distances. Today, they may be here, tomorrow they're somewhere else, and so on. So if we overfish it in this area over here would be adversely affected. So to have an effective management policy, we all will have to come together, maybe under the aegis of some international organization, and probably so that we can get the optimal benefit from the resources of within our waters. Particularly important as far as the mineral resources are concerned, I think we probably have less of a problem. But with respect to the fish resources, we certainly will have this particular risk. Let me just very quickly read here what Article 1.3 says regarding semi-enclosed. It says states bordering an enclosed or semi-enclosed sea should cooperate with each other in the exercise of their rights and in the performance of the duties under this convention. To this end, they shall endeavor directly or through an appropriate regional organization to coordinate the management, conservation, exploration, and exploitation of the living resources of the area, to coordinate the implementation of their rights and duties with respect to the protection and preservation of the marine environment. Of course, as you would know nowadays, the environment is a risk as protection of the environment. Well, of course, the coastal state within its existing economics exercises jurisdiction over environmental matters. But again, one state cannot on its own develop policies regarding environment, especially within our narrow exclusive economic zone. So it means that there will be need for cooperation, coordination, whatever it is regarding this protection of the marine environment, because of our exclusive economic zone is just part of this. There are a number of other considerations that we have to pay attention to because of this. Any question, any comment?
So before the
Yes,
easy was 200 miles maximum, you could say that the Caribbean Sea had a portion of high seas there.
Yes, exactly. Well, before the EEZ,
Yeah.
most of it would have been high seas, all here, and so on. Because you only, when I say even if you take 12 miles, 3 miles, to the high seas. And you're quite, I'm glad you mentioned that. Now with EEZ, most of it, you hardly have any high seas now, if any at all. Whatever part you go to will be somebody's EEZ. Whatever part you want to go to. So you hardly would have any high seas now within the Caribbean. Some area or another would be under somebody's jurisdiction because of the 200 miles. So if you go this way, it's the 200 miles. If you come down this way, it's 200 miles. If you go this way, somebody's 200 miles. Crisscrossing, all these lines. That's why you see all these kind of lines there. See all of them there, all of them there. Yes? Somebody's easy. This is somebody's easy. This is somebody's easy. This is somebody's easy. Yeah? So that is it. Yes. And we have had problems. Some of them say, and this is the other thing to speak about the negotiation of boundaries. Even very friendly states with enjoying harmonious relations, sometimes come unstuck when they're trying to Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados. They are friendly countries. I don't think we have anything against Bajans, and I don't think Bajans have anything against that. But sit around the table trying to conclude, they couldn't agree. Luckily, they submitted this into arbitration. And then the arbitration was able to determine the line. That's very good. Because in some countries, they just quarrel and bicker and do all this type of thing without any point. Say, all right, we got this far. We cannot agree. We cannot have this thing dragging on and on and on. And another thing too, you see, while you would be in agreement, no investor, so if you don't have the boundaries, as I told you, good boundaries make good neighbors. If you don't have the lines, if you don't have the boundaries in place, the line of delimitation, where my EEZ ends and yours begins, you probably would find, even if you have some oil or natural gas in this area, because remember, you can't develop this thing yourself. You have to get some arrangement with some company. Yeah? Because you don't have the technology, you don't have the financial resources. It costs a lot of money. think of money, but it costs a lot of money to drill a well. And when you drill a well, there's no certainty that you will find any oil. Is that right? You come with a dry well. So you're sinking a lot of money. So no company is going to come in, enter into any agreement if the probably your boundaries aren't set. This is the problem that Guyana is experiencing with Venezuela. Because, of course, as it is, you have Venezuela all the way here, large expanse of territory. And, of course, you have Guyana, a large part of its territory claimed by another country. Two-thirds of its territory. It's trying to interest investors to come to develop resources. But they saw the response from Venezuela. And it wasn't just sending off a mere diplomatic note to Guyana. It took more forceful action. They were far more assertive. They actually went into the area where this ship vessel was operating and seized it, arrested it. And that, of course, for a number of reasons. One, to send a strong signal to other countries, other companies that may be contemplating coming into these waters. Yeah. And two, for the future, you can't say that we acquiesced in what you were doing. We never did, because we got the steps, got the measure that we took. You get the point? So once you have that, it's important therefore that we get those boundaries. It's not always very easy to have the boundaries in place. So I think this basically is easy. I see you looking at me. EEZ and the kind of impact of examples. Geography, geological factors, the kind of resources that we have, mineral resources, kind of fishery resources, where we fished before, where probably we can't fish now. Facts that we may have to enter into the whole challenge of management and conservation, the area of addressing environmental issues, and so on. Yes? Laurie?
Yes.
Are you happy?
Happy.
Tanyaka? Okay. Michelle? Very quiet? You're one very quiet?
No, I just found it a really good
You
map.
you have seen enough of the lines.
Yes.
So I'm going to stop here my lecture, my part of it. And I think Amanda is raring to go. So let us speak on the continental shelf. Amanda, we hope she's going first. Meantime, I'll take a seat close to Bishop. In any one, there's even a free seat. That's whose papers are these?
That's
right?
mine, yeah.
Okay, now I'm free to sit there. Thank you very much.
Use Prezi again. I'm not use Prezi.
Where is Matthew? He's dropped out? Comes up. He's been missing in other classes too? He's been missing other classes too? And he disappears. Okay. attending to union matters, student matters,
I'd love to do that.
okay. Guild matters.
To me, I love the whole one because I had lots of
He was a
points.
class, we had a class that was political history. Yeah, he was there.
And where is Rowena today?
She is not feeling well.
She's where?
She's not feeling well.
So she's not feeling well. Okay. And who else is missing? That's all. It's a small class. Oh, Reyes and Gera.
Yeah.
Luana. And where's Raisa? Nobody knows. Huh? Well, Kenisha hasn't been coming for some time. I know her. This is, yeah, Kenisha. is there.
Okay, so good morning everybody. I will be doing below the sea and the continental shelf, and I'll be looking at the historical development as well as the definitions of what the continental shelf is and the measurement criteria. I split it up into 3 time periods, which is pre-1945, period 1945 to 1958 when the first Law of the Sea Convention was convened, and then after 1958 to present. So looking at pre-1945, the convention on the continental shelf replaced the earlier practice of nations having sovereignty over only a narrow strip of the sea surrounding them, which was the traditional 3-mile breadth, and anything beyond that strip would have been considered high seas. So this policy was used until the President of the United States, Harry Truman, proclaimed that the resources on the continental shelf contiguous to the U.S. belonged to the United States through an executive order in 1945, and many other nations quickly adopted similar policies, most stating that their portion of the sea extended either 12 or 200 nautical miles from its coast. Before he made this proclamation, there was interaction of coastal states. They had a judicial relationship with the resources of the seabed and the subsoil beyond the territorial sea, as well as to the physical seabed. There were 2 types of state practice, which was the first being sedentary fishing, as well as mining and tunneling. So one example of this is in Sri Lanka. That, of course, is a pearl, because that is one type of sedentary fishing. Pearl fisheries in Ceylon were under legislation from as early as 1811, which did not specify a distance, but in 1828 a new ordinance was passed which authorized the delineation of waters between 3 and 100 fathom lines. So they tried to establish a space within which they could exploit the resources of the seabed. And also in the United Kingdom, there is the mineral wealth, which includes mining. It's also motivated to claim rights over the seabed and subsoil of the high seas. Interest in mining was stimulated by developments in science and engineering. For example, the Cornwall Submarines Act of 1858, and that's in Cornwall, that's one of the mining cities in Cornwall, claimed the right on behalf of the United Kingdom to drive mines and to build tunnels into the subsoil even beyond the 3-mile limits of territorial sea. And other states soon adopted similar practices, such as Australia, Canada, Chile, and Japan, in search of coal. And the exploitation of the seabed beyond the territorial sea provoked much doctrinal discussion as to their legality, because what overarching legal body was governing this. The discussion focused on the nature of the seabed, which was res communis, or common heritage, or res is nullius. Nullius, which is literally nobody's property. Could resources be appropriated or not? The background to this debate was customary international law, which at the time understood an area beyond the territorial sea, including the seabed, to be high seas. So anything beyond that 3 mile, traditional 3 mile distance, including the seabed, was considered high seas. And on the 26th of February in 1942, just 3 years before the Truman Proclamation, the United Kingdom and Venezuela entered into a treaty covering the submarine areas of the Gulf of Paria, which we would be very familiar with. And according to one scholar, although the term continental shelf was not used, this treaty could be regarded as the first treaty on the continental shelf because of reference to offshore installation for the drilling of petroleum and provisions assuring freedom of navigation. So now I would look at period 1945, and obviously
Well, you don't want to emphasize that a bit more?
Sorry?
You don't want to emphasize that a bit more? I mean, after all, it's Trinidad, you know, the Gulf of Paria Treaty,
Yes.
going beyond the three nautical miles.
Well, the only thing that I can emphasize more on that is because Trinidad was not an independent state as yet, the UK had to intervene on our behalf.
Well, yeah, it's an agreement between
Yes.
Britain and Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Yeah, but when Trinidad became independent, it succeeded to that treaty. And the treaty remained in force, didn't it?
I think so.
Yes, it did.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
You're the expert.
Okay.
Right, so 1945 is obviously important because that was the year that the US president decided to make this proclamation that he is going to declare jurisdiction over the seabed and the subsoil of the continental shelf, that although technically high seas, nevertheless lay contiguous to the United States coasts, to be under its jurisdiction and control. And this is President Truman, very good-looking man. And his justification for the proclamation was that the appropriation of such submerged areas was only reasonable and just, since the responsibility for utilizing, conserving, and protecting resources found in these areas lies with the coastal state. Yes.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Or you take question after you finish?
No, you can ask a
I
question.
could ask the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you put a lot of emphasis on Truman.
Yes.
But you cited a number of earlier cases, say, for example, dealing with the Pearl of Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm.
You've cited the Gulf of Paria Treaty and so on.
Yes.
But the emphasis is on
Significance of
Truman. Yeah. So,
He was
well, why do you put more emphasis?
Because he was the one who basically gave birth to the modern concept of the continental shelf. That's why I put emphasis on him. Because you will see from him later on in my presentation that you had other states.
Or later on,
Yes.
so I'm preempting you.
Yes, you
Okay,
will.
sorry. Okay.
Right. So the submerged part of the continental shelf contiguous to the coastal state may be considered the submerged landmass of the territory of the coastal state. And finally, because the coastal state is entitled under international law to protect itself and its territory or areas which are necessary for its integrity as a sovereign state, he saw this as reasons as establishing this continental shelf. And it should be noted that both international and domestic concerns influence the issuance of the proclamation. We all know in 1945 that was the end of the Second World War. And when President Truman proclaimed the sovereignty of the US over its continental shelf, the war-weary world was impatient to recover from its ravages and hungry for resources. So there was a shortage of accessible resources. And there existed a strong drive to find new deposits of petroleum and natural gas and minerals lining the seabed and the ocean floor and its subsoil, to guard against the threatened shortage resulting from the depletion of world stocks during the Second World War, and to avoid dependence on imported supplies of these strategic raw materials. And also domestically, there were several states in the U.S. Federation that exercised jurisdiction of seabed activities beyond the 3-mile limits of the territorial waters. And there was a conflict between the federal government as well as the state, which was not settled by the Truman Proclamation. So several of these cases were subsequently attained to the U.S. Supreme Court. And 3 states, which were California, Louisiana, and Texas, attempted to exercise jurisdiction of the territorial sea and beyond. So those were 3 of these states that, even before the proclamation came into effect, they were going beyond the 3-mile, the traditional 3-mile territorial waters. And this obviously had an effect on the international system when he decided to unilaterally claim this continental shelf. And many countries did not and could not react immediately to the radical Truman Proclamation. They did not immediately realize how it would affect their own interests. And the first president of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the third one, noted that in 1945, the nations of the world were too enfeebled by 6 years of war, or too preoccupied with the pressing problems of repairing the havoc of war, or too dependent on the United States to challenge the doctrine or to reveal its flaws. So everybody, in a sense, it was more your national interest observing what the US was doing. You're doing it. You're not really paying attention to what they're doing on the international front. And then you had soon other coastal states following such claims, claiming vast areas of water and seabed in the name of sovereignty and national economic needs. And from the various ways in which coastal states made their claims to the continental shelf, you had two general judicial definitions emerging. The first was similar to the United States, which based on the geological contiguity, which is the shelf that is adjacent to the country itself, and the second was based wholly upon adjacency or contiguity to the territorial sea, regardless of the existence of a natural or geological shelf. And you will see that in the case of Peru, Ecuador, and Chile. So the first one to do that was in Saudi Arabia. There was a royal proclamation in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1949, which issued a royal pronouncement on the subsoil and seabed areas of the Persian Gulf outside of its territorial sea. And we could say that it was obviously inspired by the Truman Proclamation, but that it was a broader assertion of rights since the Persian Gulf did not have a continental shelf. And this degree thus latched onto the concept of contiguity and not to that of the geological continental shelf. So you can see that there isn't a definite, definition of what continental shelf been then, because you have some people saying it's geological in terms of an actual continental shelf, and then you have those who are attaching it to the territorial sea. They claim in a continental shelf that isn't there, which is confusing to me.
It is?
I say it's a bit confusing to me.
What is confusing?
How could you claim a continental shelf if there is no continental
If there is
shelf?
no continental
Yeah.
Well, who claimed a continental shelf if there was no continental shelf?
They did.
Who did?
The Saudi Arabians,
Uh-huh.
as well as the Peruvians and the Ecuadorians.
Well, this is the whole point. The Peruvians didn't, and the Chileans and the Ecuadorians, they didn't claim a continental shelf. They simply claimed a 200-mile limit, which included not just the area below, but also the waters.
Okay.
So if you like, their claim was more extensive than that of Truman. And you're right, for the simple reason that they did not have a continental shelf. And they recognized they didn't have a continental shelf. So they were not going to confine themselves to continental shelf. They said 200 miles. The question is, of course, would it be 200-mile territorial sea?
Yeah.
And of course, if you say 200-mile territorial sea, straight away you have a problem now with the same USA. Because Truman made it clear in his proclamation that the status of the superadjacent waters would remain high seas.
Yeah.
He was very, very careful. Why?
Because he did not want to affect his ships.
That's right. You see, if you are the United States, you have important strategic interests all around the world. You are a global power. So the high seas mean a lot to you. You have to be able quickly to deploy your ships, wherever and whenever that may become necessary, wherever there is a conflict. And even today, as you would know, the United States will have fleet in just about every sea, every ocean. The Sixth Fleet, this fleet, that fleet. Yeah. Not many countries could match that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so, and you also had another country in the Persian Gulf who was, Kuwait, who also issued a proclamation claiming the seabed and subsoil that lay beneath the high seas of the Persian Gulf, right? And then further on in 1952, with the Santiago Declaration, you had Chile, Ecuador, and Peru asserting, well, I didn't get one with the whole of Chile in it, but this was their maritime claims, right? asserted that all countries which had no continental shelf claimed sole jurisdiction and sovereignty over the area of sea extended 200 nautical miles from their coast, including sovereignty and jurisdiction over the seafloor and subsoil thereof. So does that mean that they left the water what is this?
Superjason.
Superjason.
Or the waters like above the waters above. Huh?
Was that going to remain as high seas, or was that
No. They just, to me, what they were saying is that they claim everything.
Yeah.
Waters, they claimed everything because they were saying you couldn't separate
Yeah.
the waters from the submarine area
Yeah.
because of the closeness between the two. And there's a certain logic there because they say life in the water is dependent on what goes on down there.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So why you talk about continental shelf? The whole thing should be one zone, yeah? So this is why sometimes we can trace now the origin
Yeah.
of the exclusive economic zone to that. Even though they didn't call it by that, but the concept, they came up with it. Waters as well as submarine area. Later on, of course, much later, we came up with this idea of exclusive economic. I think the Africans brought that into the lexicon, exclusive economic zone.
So that was basically just a short summary of what it is they did.
Yeah.
And then of course you have Venezuela again, who in the Act of July 1956 of Venezuela concerning the territorial sea continental shelf fishery protection and airspace was a bit unusual because unlike other declarations, it included a proviso, and the blue is Venezuela's maritime claim. They were basically saying that channels, depressions, or irregularities in the seabed of the continental shelf shall not constitute a break in the continuity of that shelf, and banks which by position or natural conditions are related to the continental shelf. So although last week when they were showing you there's a continental shelf, there's a slope, they were saying that does not interrupt their version of continental shelf.
It continues beyond the
Yes, it continues beyond
depression.
that. And you have to know
But
that.
what do you think? It should be a natural boundary? Once you get a depression, that's the end of your shelf? What do you think? They are saying no, it could continue beyond.
Yes.
Do you think that should be serve as a sort of a natural boundary, or you think you
No.
agree with them? You can go beyond
I
it?
agree with the Venezuelans.
Okay.
Right. And it should be noted that the speed with which many states claimed a judicial continental shelf facilitated the concept's rapid acceptance by the international community. Only 13 years after the Truman Proclamation, the concept of the continental shelf had become so established and accepted that during the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, which was the first one, it merited a whole convention for itself, the 1958 Convention on the Continental Shelf. So you can see that it became instant customary law, right? But my issue is, if the states went on unilaterally claiming expanses of continental shelf, you were bound to have issues arising, especially with countries being so close to each other. So now you had an attempt to codify the law of the sea, and the International Law Commission was the one that was responsible for doing that. Initially, the continental shelf remained a subtopic of the regime of the high seas. However, departing radically from the marginal treatment of the continental shelf by its predecessor, the ILC viewed the codification of the concept of the continental shelf as being extremely important for economic and social reasons, obviously. Noting the numerous unilateral declarations and proclamations made by many states, the ILC agreed that rights over the continental shelf should be recognized under international law, even those states that had no geological continental shelf. And in the beginning, the ILC could not agree on a definition of the continental shelf. Its first report referred to the concept as an area of the seabed and subsoil of the submarine area situated outside its territorial waters, and as such limited in scope unless the depths of the waters permitted exploitation. And a subsequent definition in the 1951 draft, because they kept doing drafts to come to some sort of consensus, provided that the continental shelf refers to the seabed and subsoil of the submarine areas contiguous to the coast but outside the area of territorial waters where the depth of the superadjacent waters admits of the exploitation of the natural resources of the seabed and subsoil. So the ILC emphasized that the term continental shelf was not used in its geological sense. Such would not be justified in the case of areas beyond the geological continental shelf, but where the depth of the sea would nevertheless permit exploitation of the subsoil in a way as if there were a continental shelf. Hence, the term continental shelf did not only mean continental shelf in a geological sense, but also included other types of submarine areas, including submarine areas of islands. So with respect to depth, the ILC considered the limit of up to 200 meters, but decided against it because technical developments in the future might make it possible to exploit resources of the seabed at a depth of over 200 meters. So again, they would try to confine themselves by giving themselves a limitation. They left it open because they know, yes, with the improvement in technology, obviously you're going to be able to go further, you're going to be able to go deeper. So after 10 years of work, the ILC submitted its report to the UN General Assembly in 1957, and despite its analysis of the interrelatedness of ocean issues, the ILC did not submit a comprehensive draft convention, but they submitted several draft conventions, and we knew that they were for, which was basically covering a range of topics. So you had the one on the territorial sea, the one on the contiguous zone, the one on the high seas, and continental shelf, and fishing and conservation of the living resources.
Of the high seas.
Yes, there was one on the high seas. So the Convention on the Continental Shelf of 1958, which was in the first UN Clause 1, the definition of and its limits to the judicial continental shelf were principally retained in Article 1 of the 1958 Convention. That was in the draft that the ILC had submitted. They basically maintained that in the actual Convention of 1958. And in addition to establishing a definition and limits, the 1958 Convention also clarified the nature of the right of a coastal state over its continental shelf in paragraphs 2 and 3 of Article 2. And the rights of a coastal state over its continental shelf are exclusive and do not depend on occupation, effective or notional, or any explicit proclamation. And the exploitability factor as one of the limits of the continental shelf was both a strength and a weakness of the 1958 Convention because it afforded states flexibility who might one day acquire technology to exploit the continental shelf beyond 200 meters.
Not so fast. Let them pause and let them take in some of this thing. It's a very important point. So when you're making an important point, you're supposed to pause a while and you're supposed to ask Laurie whether she gets it, because this is important.
Okay, so shall I be slow?
Yes, and call Laurie and ask her, to see if you get this point.
Mr. Francis was talking about the emphasis on exploitation, right? And the exploitability factor as one of the limits of the continental shelf was both a strength and a weakness in the 1958 Convention. Because on one hand, it afforded flexibility to states who might one day acquire technology to exploit the continental shelf beyond 200 meters. So let's say if Caribbean countries eventually got the technology to do so, it would have been a benefit to them. But it also meant that there were actually no real limits to the judicial or legal continental shelf. The exploitability factor was criticized in particular as regards to the delimitation of overlapping shelves. Everybody understand that? And of course you had criticisms with everything else that UN does. And it attracted attention not only because it was a new concept.
Why didn't you give us a diagram to see this thing clearly?
I didn't have a diagram.
Okay.
I did this last night. I apologize. Yeah, so it attracted attention not only because...
You could very well have said, as though he would have given a diagram if he was doing it.
I was trying to get the diagram. Yeah, because it was a new concept, but also because it involved a radical shift in the zoning of maritime seas. Moreover, since the judicial continental shelf was supposed to sit on the seabed of the high seas, it thus stood to affect a very traditional and fundamental principle of the law of the sea, which is the freedom of the seas. Everybody understands that? Do you have any questions? Oh, I feel good. criticisms were the impact on the freedom of navigation, which we spoke about a little while ago when we were talking about high seas, because critics argued that if structures were to be erected in the continental shelf, these artificial islands and other structures that they allowed coastal states to have, erected in the continental shelf for oil exploration or exploitation purposes, such structures would definitely affect navigation in the high seas. I don't really think that's a proper criticism. I don't really think that's a valid criticism. That's my opinion. And the international shelf as instant custom. So the many unilateral state declarations prompted one famous expert to assert as nearly as 1950 that the concept of the continental shelf had developed into customary international law. Like I said, within 13 years of the introduction, had a lot of countries making all these unilateral claims, which was bound to go into some sort of conflict. And also conceptual ambiguities. Like I said, they didn't clearly define what continental shelf, but you would think it was just geographic in nature or geological in nature, but there was the observation of certain international lawyers that when the concept of continental shelf emerged, there was nothing in international law to prevent states from making laws for the exploitation of natural resources. From this, it follows that the right of any state to engage in the exploitation of resources in the submarine areas needs no new doctrinal justification. Yeah. So I think if it is you don't clearly define what it is, you're setting yourself up for lots and lots of problems. So from there, we move on from 1958, which was the first Law BC Convention, to present. And well, we all know the second convention on Law BC, they didn't agree on anything. So we move on to the third one. And another conference was called in 1973 to address the issues of pertaining to the sea, and the UN CLOOs 3, which lasted until 1982 due to a required consensus, adjusted and redefined many principles stated in the first UN CLOS, because they realized that there are shortcomings in the first one, so we need to be more clear.
Just say UNCLOS.
Yes.
UNCLOS 3.
UNCLOS 3. Right. So the new definition of the continental shelf in the new convention rendered the 1958 convention definition as obsolete, and the principal reason for this was technological advancements. So this is why they updated it. So the definition, which is Article 76, Paragraph 1 of the UNCLOS 3, states that the continental shelf of a coastal state comprises the seabed and subsoil of the submarine areas that extend beyond its territorial sea.
But just a slight thing, maybe a little fussy. UNCLOS was a conference. UNCLOS was a conference. So what you're looking at is the convention itself. UNCLOS 3 produced the convention.
Yes.
So you have to say Article 76 of the 82 convention.
Of the 82 convention, my mistake. Yes. So due to a that extend beyond its territorial sea throughout the natural prolongation of its land territory to the outer edge of its continental margin, or to a distance of 200 nautical miles from the baselines from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured, where the outer edge of the continental margin does not extend up to that distance. And that's a very long way of basically going to this. So as you can see, when Vishal...
So I have my diagram now.
Yes, I have your diagram. I have your diagram. So as you can see, the continental shelf goes out up to 200 nautical miles, and they also compare it to the sovereignty of the state. So you have your sovereign territory, which is your territorial sea and so on. Then you have sovereign rights over the water column and continental shelf, which is your exclusive economic zone. And then beyond that, sovereign rights to the continental shelf. But you have to get permission from the UN if it is you want to extend beyond the 200 nautical mile mark, and you can't go further than 350 nautical miles. You can't do that. So the distance criterion, the continental shelf of a coastal state comprises the seabed and its subsoil, which extend beyond the limits of its territorial sea throughout the natural prolongation of its land territory. to the outer edge of the continental margin or to a distance of 200 miles from the baselines from which the territorial sea is measured, where the outer edge of the continental margin does not extend up to that distance. And in cases where the continental margin extends further than 200 miles, nations may claim jurisdiction of up to 350 miles from the baseline or 100 miles from the 2,500 meter depth, depending on certain criteria, such as the thickness of sedimentary deposits. So you have ways of measuring sedimentary deposits. These rights would not affect the legal status of the waters or that of the airspace above the continental shelf. So while you have the option, the privilege of being able to exploit your continental shelf, again, you don't have jurisdiction over the airspace or the water because that quantifies as high seas. And to counterbalance the continental shelf extension, coastal states must also contribute to a system of sharing the revenue derived from the exploitation of mineral resources beyond the 200 miles. So it's not just because you want to extend beyond 200 miles that everything is being you have to share. These payments or contributions from which developing countries are the net importers of the minerals in question are exempt and are to be equitably distributed among states parties to the convention through the International Seabed Authority. So they try to put things in place for countries that aren't so well off or don't have the technology to exploit their continental shelf. And to control the claims extending beyond the 200 miles, the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf was established to consider the data submitted by the coastal states and make recommendations. So even though you submit a request to go beyond the 200 miles, you're not guaranteed to get it.
But then you said states that don't have the technology.
Sorry?
So you said states which do not have the technology. But if they don't have the technology, what would they do?
At the end of the day, right, in my mind, just because you don't have the technology, that doesn't mean that you should be, you should have a less continental.
Well, no. The point I'm trying to make is this. Technology shouldn't, may not be a very serious problem, because what those states would do, they would enter into agreements, into arrangements with companies, foreign companies. For example, Trinidad, down in Guayari, where we do most of our exploration now. It's not a Trinidad company that is there exploiting the resources. It's pt2. So Trinidad and Tobago invited pt2 to come in, sat down, negotiated, entered into an agreement with them. So they don't really have the technology, but they have entered into the thing, and that is the agreement. Because not many countries, in any event, even countries with the technology, they like the United States, U.S. itself would not be involved, because in terms of its own economic arrangement, it would prefer these activities to be carried out by companies, not the government itself. Yeah. Because that again is a particular kind of model, economic model that you follow. So let private companies do it. Unless, I don't know, your position might be better if the state does it. You want the state to do it? Huh? No, I'm just saying your own view.
No.
Okay.
There's a benefit and there's a disadvantage to having the state do it. And then that might be higher taxes.
States tend to be inefficient too. When states do things, they tend to be inefficient too.
Wow.
It's sad, but it's true. The state is doing this and it's, almost everything run by the state is run inefficiently. Isn't that true?
Yes, they're very inefficient.
I don't want to generalize, but this is, in most cases, that's what you find. The state, they like to be involved sometimes, but what happens is that sometimes they employ people who probably don't even have the competence to do some of the work. So it's a lot of patronage. That's the problem with the state, a lot of patronage. Jobs for the boys. Everybody must eat a food. Yeah. Well, that's what happens with the state. At one time I used to believe in the state a lot, but more and more, as I get older, I say, look,
Just got to decide.
yes, I have seen too much with the state. There's a time when the state owned a lot here in Trinidad. Telephone company. Never worked. So eventually we got TSTT. And then, we extended the services. So where you didn't have service before, then you got services. State wasn't. What is it? Carney 1975 Limited. Loss after loss after loss after loss. Had to be taking money from the treasury, from the exchequer, to run a company that should be making some money for you. You get what I mean? Eventually they had to close it because it was hemorrhaging the country. Too much money being spent. But again, it's the state. The state could have probably tried to privatize the company. And then what we saw eventually, sometimes, well, state before, say the state. We had different models over the years. Owning the commanding heights. In your reading, you've come across that? Owning the commanding heights of the economy? You haven't come across that? Anyway, that was in the 60s, we are very fond of that expression. Owning the commanding heights of the economy. And the state was busy getting into a number of areas. But then what we found is that they were not running them efficiently.
Because they had no experience doing that.
Well, they should have
in the
known.
1960s, they now came into
Yeah,
independence, they have no experience.
Even if you said in 1960, even if they go into it now, the same thing would happen. Yeah? Yes, the same thing would happen, Amanda. State cannot run a lot of. Look, watch. They can't even run the civil service. You just think about it. They have the public service when they can't run it. Ministry of Health, you have complaints after complaints. They cannot run what they have. I'm not exaggerating, but this is the reality. They can't run even what they have in the public service. The school system, this, that. The state of, let alone now you take and you give them additional things to run.
So do you think that they should privatize these things?
Maybe they should. I'm not necessarily saying that. But what I'm trying to say is that even what they're supposed to be running, they can't run.
Exactly.
You and I seeing that all the time. People going to the hospital, they're complaining. They're complaining about the schools. Schools are all now, some schools, look at the news. You look at the news. Some schools are still, after how many weeks, are not functioning. They say they set up a company to repair schools. They're supposed to do it in the vacation. All now, some of those things still are not done. That is the state.
They set up a whole company for that.
Yeah. So, anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, I was finished.
Huh?
So that would conclude my...
But that's your thing. Thank you very much. You've done a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Because now I can understand why you had all the sleepless nights. But sleepless night, you've done a wonderful job because you've really done it very, very thoroughly, very comprehensively. Any questions? Well, you have to ask for questions.
Yes, do you all have any questions?
Yes, you can't just rush up.
Really? I can't.
So wait, I didn't do my presentation today. I do my presentation next week.
No, you're doing it
I'm
now.
doing it now. Okay.
You want to do it next week?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to do my presentation with two people. We shall talk about it.
All right. Okay. You will do it next week. Let me just.
Hello.
Some of the questions that you should have. I will ask some of the questions that you should have.
Everybody has to hear it.
That's the one. So why didn't you ask? Amanda? Yeah, what the question you have?
What happens beyond 200 nautical
You should have asked Amanda that.
miles
Yeah.
in terms of, I think it's still natural?
It doesn't really matter to me. What in terms of that. That's right. Okay, good.
If I claim, if I'm a state and I claim, because it's all of us, so we go back to the original position before the 12 nautical miles or the 200, where we could say this is mine.
Mhm.
Every state can do that.
Mhm.
What regulates that then?
Or the convention. When you claim of the 200 miles,
Which authority is there to say that I don't exploit it or I don't take advantage of it?
right? The 200 miles, within the 200
Beyond
miles.
that, yes.
That's yours. The regulation is this. Every living resource, or say every type of resource, living as well as non-living, is yours. You have the exclusive right to the resources within the 200 miles. Yes?
Yeah.
If, for some reason, you can't exploit everything, as I said a while ago, let's say, for example, this one, oil, natural gas. What is it? The oil and the natural gas? Yeah, well, whatever the resource. But you know what the thing is, as I said, you will invite a foreign investor to come in because you don't have any investors within your country that probably with that kind of capability. And it did have some case. Trinidad, a lot of its oil is being exploited in the southeastern area of oil and Miami. But who is doing it? It is pt2. It's not Petrotrin, it's not some other Trinidad and Tobago company. It's pt2. Huge, large, multinational company.
So what I'm asking is beyond the national jurisdiction of any state, which authority is there to protect those?
Oh, you mean to go beyond the 200 miles?
Yeah.
Why didn't you say that?
The international seabed authority.
Okay. Beyond. So within the 200 miles is the coastal state. All the rights to the resources. Fine. The other thing is, what happens beyond the 200 miles? Because the exclusive economic zone thing says 200 nautical miles, measured from the baseline. The continental shelf regime, as we've just mentioned, they use two criteria. They say 200 nautical miles. Well, that's the second part of it, one criteria. And the other criteria is geological. They say what constitutes its natural prolongation of the land territory up to the end of the continental margin, is what you said? Yeah. Up to the end of the continental margin.
Just treat us differently.
Well, it's not all the same thing in our cases. You say you can go up to. That's right, that's right, that's right. Because as you would appreciate, the geological or geographical circumstances would not be the same in our country. There are some countries, not many of them, who would have a shelf that will take them way beyond the 200 miles. And that's what they're looking at, you see. So they say you can go up to the end. So the end of your continental margin, in some cases, could take you beyond the 200. And then is what she said, well, you can go up to a maximum of 350.
Yeah,
so your case is, your question is, well, beyond that national jurisdiction, what happens?
What authority is in place to manage that?
Yes, Laurie, yes.
It is managed as a matter.
Why didn't you ask her? But she could have told you, well, I'm dealing with continental shelf, because beyond that there is no continental shelf again. Ice is down below, well, it's ice in the waters above. But beyond this, Laurie, you looking at me? Beyond that, if you observe, she came down with a slope. You observe that, imagine. And then if you observe, the thing went further up.
Yeah.
Isn't that right? Isn't that the diagram that you had?
Yes.
That area beyond there is called the deep seabed.
Right.
And this is why she was saying, she made the point, remember? So this, I'm not too happy with this exploitability criterion. I'm not too happy with it. She had some difficulty because she said, once you develop the technology, and you're allowed, you can now go beyond to very great depths. This exploitability thing will create problems. And this is why they moved away in the 82 convention. In the 58 convention, they spoke of exploitability as far as would admit of exploitability. But by the time we got to 82, they had to move away from it, because by then the technology was sufficiently developed to enable states to go way beyond the 200 miles. Now I don't know what is the limit now. And we'll just probably address about everything. So this is what you call beyond national jurisdiction, what you call the deep seabed. We haven't done that yet. So I have to give you in a few minutes, just a few minutes. I don't think anybody has any
What I
questions.
read is that the UN sailors did not when they in 1982 did not envisage that be a problem.
In when?
1982.
No, by that time they knew. No. Way before that. In the late 60s, and this is where I come to it was a convention. In the late 60s, 67, 65, late 60s, as we said in the introduction lecture, the way that the technology developed and the rapidity with which it made the law out of date. So, Truman speak of continental shelf and all this thing. But again, why continental shelf? Again, you have to see the impact that technology has on the law. Because if your technology develops sometimes, you will find, wait a minute, we have continental shelf now, but we don't have a regime to address this issue of exploitation. This is why Truman had to move quickly and say, well, on my shelf there is mine, you know. Nobody else coming here. If you want to claim what is supposed to be up to you. But I am claiming for the United States. This. So it is the technology that made it necessary for Truman in the first place to make his proclamation. Because you didn't have any law dealing with it, and we needed a law. But the law, if you like, was for a while behind the technology. Good. Now, after that, Truman did, you couldn't go too far beyond the continental shelf. But not too long after the 58 convention, you could now go to depths far more than the 200 meters depth that you spoke of. To very, very great depth. But when that happened, that technology developed. A gentleman from Malta, Ambassador Arvid Pardo, remember his name? A Maltese. Malta is larger than the Mediterranean. That's like any other Caribbean island. Not only Truman that come up with things and have impact on the law of the sea. Ambassador Pardo came to realize that the technology had developed for states to go way beyond the continental shelf. He came to the General Assembly of the United Nations with a resolution saying, look, now it is possible to go to these great depths, to the deep seabed. What we don't want is those states that have the technological and financial wherewithal to run and take everything. So he came with this resolution, with this proposal before the United Nations to say that that area here, deep seabed, should be the heritage, the common heritage of mankind. And that's how I get this concept. Deep seabed will be the common heritage of mankind. That means anything that we do here should be for the benefit of mankind. I think nowadays people will say humankind. I see the young ladies looking at me and say mankind. I said, but us ladies, humankind. Mankind. Sometimes you do mankind. It's man. But young ladies, why don't you hear them? Humankind. And you use the term humankind sometimes. That's right, humankind. Anyway, they say mankind. So, and then what they said, this constituted in the convention, part 11. And under UNCLOS 3, this is what took the most time. This is what caused the conference to go on for so long. So long after we had settled the issue of exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, we had concerned with all those things. But long after we had resolved and settled those issues, this deep seabed regime created problems. Because the developing countries, and countries were divided along this line. Developed, developing. But the developing countries like us, wanted to ensure that the benefits would not be just for those industrialized countries and their companies. So this is why the concept, common heritage of mankind, and we're going to develop a regime for this area, the deep seabed regime, where the developing countries would be able to reap benefits from activities conducted in this deep seabed. And at one time, things looked very promising, because it's speaking about important minerals. Manganese, cobalt, copper, and some of these minerals. Yes? So our eyes started to this right. Finally, we get it. We have to ensure. So we said, okay, we're going to set up an authority. This is the point we're making. The Seabed Authority. Amanda made mention of the Seabed Authority. If you're going beyond the 200 miles of exploited, you have to pay something to the Seabed Authority. That's what she said. So you have the Seabed Authority. I didn't think I set up a Seabed Authority. It's in Jamaica. You have a Seabed Authority set up in Jamaica, right? Okay, Jamaica. And they now will be responsible for any activities conducted. So even if you have a company's coming, they would have to get license or permission, whatever it is, from the Seabed Authority. Okay? That was the issue of the city. But there was a big debate. Some developing countries wanted the authority to have exclusive access to the resources of this deep sea.
We didn't want any involvement from private sector companies and so on. And the argument is this is a long debate. It wasn't something that was went on for 1 year. Long debate. Until finally there was a compromise where they said, okay, we will have a dual system. The civil authority will be able to conduct activities. And for the civil authority to do it, it will have to create its own arm to exploit, which they call the enterprise. So the enterprise will be able to go in there and activities. And then companies, the mining companies, can obtain a license from the civil authority and be so side by side, these two. But guess what? You're looking at me. Now, for the question I was going to you, Bishop, you leave it? Okay. all right.
See you guys.
Okay. So, the company, how is the enterprise going to get the technology? Because you're dealing with a very advanced level of technology. It's very, very, very deep what is going on. Yes. So how do they get to the technology? Who has the technology? Not states. Companies now. Companies. Like the difference between company and state is not states.
Okay, the private.
Putting all the yes, they are the people with the technology. When we want to exploit resources in the of oil, we didn't go to any state. We went to the company. We went to a company, foreign company, pt2. Yeah, we didn't go to U.S. or America. We might have gone to an American company or something, but we went to that company. Yeah, because they don't get many states, especially the developed states. They don't believe in being involved in all these things because they have a particular model that they observe. They say what will be done by private enterprise should be done by private enterprise. They believe in the private enterprise system. They believe in the market. Yeah? And for them, I say we think in state. When we here developing countries want like state. Yeah? State. I told you I used to like the state too. More and more sort of going with the state. Because I realized that even things that the state is supposed to, even services that they're supposed to provide services. Everything is crumbling, everything is collapsing, isn't it? Even things we think that they should be involved in health, education. Is that correct? True, yeah, I'm not doing that. The state. And in the 60s, we were thinking differently. The state has to intervene. The state must do this. The state must do that. Here in Trinidad, the experience of Trinidad and Tobago, one resource, steel company. We started off with ISCOT, which is a state company. ISCOT, Iron and Steel Company of Trinidad and Tobago, you know what I do? Tanyaka is so young, Tanyaka never heard of ISCOT. And yet, how much of the story is that? Those days, Trinidad and Tobago had a lot of money. Why? The state coffers, built a state company. Call it ISCOT. It belongs to the state. No private sector involvement in the state. Well, guess what? Before long, loss after loss after loss after loss. So at one time, the government was in McDonald's. They might have just shut it down to be better for you because you were trying to operate it and you're making these big losses. You're incurring very heavy losses. Just as they say, money. Just a bit less, just a bit high. And then came in a company, ISCOT, an Indian company, ISCOT. And guess what? ISCOT was able to turn around the fortunes.
Well, what did the company do and why couldn't the state have done that?
And that too, this is the nature of the state. The state is just, yeah?
But isn't it, I don't think that the state itself is
One of the reasons why the state is here is what government is concerned. Government often would not operate on strict commercial principles. You, Tanyaka, you have good, strong political connection. Guess what?
they are appointing you as CEO. I might be the better person for the job here. But they are appointing Tanyaka as thing because maybe, what is it? Tanyaka's father is a financial party. Yeah? The state operates like that. So therefore, Tanyaka cannot really run the thing as well as I can. And she's running it into the ground, but Tanyaka is still the person who has the job. Yeah? Look at what's happening with national borders. You see, this is how the state operates. I would say, yes, but I just give you the example of Iron Steel Company of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
And then Eastman came. Right now, whatever is there now, they're making a profit. Yeah. But yes. Go ahead.
But then the state has changed its. Isn't one that the state needs to evolve and needs to change the way that it's been dealing with things? Because if you're saying that the same sort of form that like when the state was running companies in the 70s and it's still happening in the 80s and it's still happening in the 90s, then the state itself needs to change. Because in the end, when these foreign companies come in, they are actually still gaining the most profit from the government. So I think that the state would actually rehabilitate itself and its processes. Then the companies would be able to actually make a profit for the country itself.
But you have a point. I mean, no. You have a point because sometimes the foreign investor comes and himself, even if a profit is made, a lot of that profit doesn't accrue to the state. It goes out. Yes, that is quite true. It's quite true. So, state-armed entities running at a loss. Private may come in, they may make a profit, but a lot of that profit doesn't accrue to the state. It goes out of the country. So that is absolutely true. So what is the state? What is the state to do? It's only if maybe the state will have to say, look, we're going to have a hands-off approach. Create this company, establish it, and stay out of its business. Let it run. Politicians cannot resist. This is the difficulty. It's difficult for politicians to resist that kind. They like, as I said, this whole thing of patronage. Put friends there.
But isn't it possible?
Yeah, it's possible. If you got a prime minister like me, yes, it's possible. Yes, because I would do just that. I wouldn't be interfering too much. Yeah, well, that's right. And then it's okay, that's right, Laurie. So maybe if I'm not prime minister, I do the same thing, then I do the same thing too. Yes, that's right.
Just tell us what you're doing.
Anyway, that, digressing. But the point is this, it's very deep event. But where we are now, all this time that we spent in the developing part 11 of this thing, by the time we got into the 1990s, we had to revisit it because, as I told you, the United States was not happy. Because, of course, they felt too much planning, not enough. The market wasn't determining everything. And so they said we're not going to be part of this arrangement if this is what we have. So eventually, we had to move away. Part 11 was, in a sense, built more on, as I said, this enterprise and this seabed authority and so on. And the United States position was that we have to move more towards private sector, private companies, getting freer access. This whole idea that even must be able to transfer technology to enterprise and so on. That's a different matter. In any event, even if states say transfer technology, remember, the technology is not owned by the state. It is the companies, in many cases, which have the technology. As a result of years of research. So something you can't just explain it, and that's what gives you the edge over your competitors. So would I just take my technology and just give it? I'm not going to do that. How am I going to maintain my advantage? This is what drives the private sector. This is what drives the private sector. I want to be 1 step, 2 steps ahead of you. Isn't that correct? So these are some of the issues. So after that, we had to now revise this part 11. And they came up now with what if like a new agreement to amend part 11 of the convention. They came up with it in 1994.
norms, I think, probably that what we have now is more acceptable to these. But you have, if you like, a lot of, let's call it ideology. How you see things, ideological differences over how we should develop the resources in the area and exploit and exploit. So, but that is the point. And guess what? Because prices of minerals have fallen, it's now not even too profitable to go and exploit the resources in the deep sea. It's expensive. So guess what? The prospects that the thing had when we were negotiating in the 70s and so now, nothing much. So not much is taking place really. I would say, of course, nothing much is taking place. What will determine it will have to be commercial considerations if it is profitable. But right now, it is not that profitable. So we were very, very hopeful that there was this new source of wealth and blah, blah, blah. Look at it finally. But at the end, we say, well, alas, everything is just like a mirage. Maybe, who knows? Maybe things might change afterwards, prices might go sky high and you might say, okay, this complicated. But for the time being, nothing much is really happening. And much of our activities are within the EEZ continental shelf. As I said, in any event, most of the resources in the sea, living as well as non-living, are within the 200 nautical miles zone. That is the centerpiece as far as resources and so on are concerned. Living as well as non-living. As you go further out beyond the 200 miles, less fish. As the waters get deeper, fish like to live in graves, when it gets dark and things, maybe not enough nutrients and so on. Similarly with respect to your resources, your mineral resources on the continental shelf, in geological sense. As you go for even in the deep sea bed, you will have more resources lying on the continental shelf than you will have in the deep sea bed. You do have on the deep sea bed. We know that is what they call polymetallic nodules. But so we have a lot to it. We have a lot. It's just a question of being able to exploit the resources. And the point that Tandiaka was making with respect to limits, the arrangements of the company, well, is for us to try to negotiate as skillfully as we can to try to ensure that we get probably the best deal from the arrangement. We get as big a part. We want it to be profit, but not abnormal profits. Enough we can get the return on the investment. We can't be against profit, but not too much, so that very little will be accrued. We have to try to get that balance. But you see what happens. They are much better at us in negotiating. And whereas we just here in Trinidad, these are big companies. As they say, the world is the oyster. Here in Trinidad, you're over in Africa, you're over somewhere else, you're over somewhere else. You get it, I mean? And they can come and take a look. You concluded an agreement with the Africans, they come and take a look. You say, and if probably you don't have to hold it, there's that much resources in this thing. I say, well, so. And then you don't have that many companies drilling for electricity waters. There's a few of them. And I would think that the close touch with the one of the common separate systems, it's always been out of one company. Yes, Tanya?
It's just that the whole thing with that, and again, because I did the trade class the fact is that these multinational corporations, when they come into the country and they allege that the host country is going to make a profit from it, it doesn't really happen because they still bring in their own workers who get the highly skilled positions, and the citizens of the host country get maybe slightly higher pay than the regular country. It's still low paying in comparison. There's not as much room for growth because they'll just still bring in the outside people, as well as the taxes and stuff from, it doesn't really go to the host country. It's still they're still paying back to, basically
Well, no, your tax will come to you. If you tax them, the tax.
Yes, but the majority of the profits is still going back to the.
Yeah, well, apart from that, too, because they multinational.
And also they sign agreements with the host country where basically that they don't have to, they don't have to do a lot of the same sort of, I'm saying pandering to government that companies within the host country has to do to gain some access to certain things, as well as just basically the contracts that they get are just overall so much better for them rather than for the host country.
Yes, and this is how that could happen. You see, it's difficult to control it. Because one, like BP, say, for example, you would have a number of subsidiaries in the Gulf of Mexico, there. Now, if Trinidad's tax, and that's how Trinidad is going to get its money, through taxes. Where Trinidad say taxes are, say, higher, say that those of, say, an African country where they are, what they would do is to try to register the profits in a place where the tax is lower. So although the tax rate here is very high, but then they will be showing on the books. Because why? How do they do it? Because they have to deal, there is inter-corporation dealing. The subsidiary here is dealing with a subsidiary in the Gulf of Mexico. So if they have to provide a service, they will charge them a very high tax here in Trinidad. So that the higher they pay out for the service, then the profit is not going to be registered in Trinidad. Profit is registered elsewhere where the tax rate is much lower. So you get this kind of transfer pricing, and they're able in a sense to evade a large part of the tax. It's difficult to control them, but they are operating, as I call them, transnational stock across borders. It is possible to do some of these things. And before you know it, then of course they ask for this and they ask for that and they ask for that, and sometimes the host country gives them all these things that they want to fill up, what they call incentives for them to come into. I don't know how we can do it. We ourselves, we probably do this. We will end here. Thank you very much for staying because it's right there. Thank you very much. So we will come back.